Hello, my name is Dan Hopwood with the Retirement Planning Store. Just a little bit about us. Number one, we have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. We have over 70 years combined experience in our organization, and we help clients retire younger, richer. In our time today, I'd like to take a few minutes and walk you through 5 retirement traps that are working hard to spoil your retirement future. Each one is unique and some are more significant than others, but all are important to understand because I'd like to help you avoid each one of them. So let's take a look at the first one. The first one is called the access trap. The best way for me to explain the access trap is by asking you a question. And the question is this: if you wanted to get some of your retirement money today, what would happen? If you are like most people and are contributing to the government-sponsored tax-qualified plan, like a 401k, a traditional IRA, a SEP IRA, or a simple IRA, or a 403b, then all the income you take from your tax-qualified retirement account will be fully taxable as income. And if you are under age 59 and a half, then you will also incur an additional 10% income tax penalty for early withdrawal. That means if you are currently in America's top tax bracket, you will have to pay the IRS 50 cents on every dollar you withdraw. You probably realize that you needed to pay tax on this money, but you may not have really stopped to think about what this actually means. If you needed to take all the money in your 401k right now, how would you feel to have to pay 50 cents in tax on every dollar you withdrew? Have you ever stopped to think that right now only around 65% of your 401k really belongs to you? The second trap is a transfer trap. One of the things that frustrates me when I hear the government talk about raising taxes on the rich is that it doesn't tell the whole story. If you die with your money in a tax-qualified plan, you are rich, because if you want to pass your money in that account onto your heirs, 100% of it will be taxed as income to them upon your death, potentially subjecting the entire amount to the highest income tax bracket available. Let's take a look at what that might mean. If you passed on $500,000 from your tax-qualified plan to your heirs, $175,000 of it would go to the IRS, and that's at today's historically low rates that we'll look at in the next slide. If you had $2 million left in your account, the IRS would get $700,000. Is that really where you want your money to go? Like I said, even though tax rates feel brutal right now, they really are actually near a 100-year historical low. Let's take a look at this graph. I'll explain this more in other slides later. But for now, I want to point out that much of the 1940s, 50s, 60s had top tax rates that were above 90%. Those rates peaked in 1944 and 1945 at 94%. Could you imagine keeping only 6 cents out of each dollar you earn? The third retirement trap actually has 2 components. The first component, I'd like to ask you a question. When was the last time you fully read the Social Security statement that you receive each year? This is what it looks like. But let's take a look at this paragraph. In 2015, we will begin paying more in benefits than we collect in taxes. Without changes in 2037, the Social Security Trust Fund will be able to pay only 78 cents for each dollar of scheduled benefits. We need to resolve these issues soon to make Social Security continues to provide a foundation of protection and future generations. And you're going to laugh at this. When we were looking for generic Social Security statement online as we were building this PowerPoint, I'd like to show you this message we received. In light of the current budget situation, we have suspended issuing Social Security statements. Is this who you want to trust your retirement to? The first problem with Social Security is that it is already broke system. It has no money. But the second problem with Social Security is one that most people don't know about, and we'll take a look at that on the next slide. Most people don't know that up to 85% of their Social Security income can be taxable, depending on where their income in retirement is coming from. In other words, if you make too much in wages, then your Social Security income becomes taxable. Here's the problem. All of the money that you withdraw from your tax-qualified account is considered wages. So that can significantly affect your Social Security income. So the two problems with Social Security is that number one, it's broke, and number two, it may not be as much as you expect due to income taxation. These last two are really significant retirement traps. The fourth trap is the tax trap. Because of the raging battle in Congress, everyone knows that our current official national debt is north of $16.7 trillion. But most people have no idea just how big 1 trillion really is. Here is a picture of a stack of 1 million worth of $100 bills. However, if you were to stack them all on top of each other, they would be just about 6 feet tall. Now this slide shows what $1 billion looks like. It's a pretty big stack. Now if you stacked it each of these on top of one another in a stack, 1 billion would be 6,700 feet tall, about 1¼ miles. Now this is what 1 trillion is $100 bills looks like. Now here's what the amazing part is. If you stack these $100 bills on top of each other, they would stand 1,260 miles tall. Think about that. Here's another perspective. Let me ask you a question. What year do you think it was 1 trillion seconds ago? Before I give you the answer, let me give you a couple of stats. There are 86,400 seconds in a day. If you do the math on that, there are 31.5 million seconds in a year. And the year it was just 1 trillion seconds ago was 30,000 BC. Another way to look at this is you could spend 16 million per year for almost 32,000 years to spend $1 trillion. And our official U.S. debt is 16 times that big. However, that's not the bad news. The bad news is that our real national debt is more than 5 times worse. You can go to truthinaccounting.org to see the real debt, which is 73 trillion and growing. Why the dramatic difference? Taxpayers' bill leaps by trillions. The reason for the discrepancy? Accounting standards require corporations and state governments to count new financial obligations, even if the payments will be made later. The federal government doesn't follow that rule. Instead, the counting lifetime benefits for programs such as Social Security, the government counts the cost of benefits. So why is any of this even significant? Well, because there are only two ways we can solve the problem. One, we can spend less. How is that one going to work out? Or two, we can tax more. Which one of these do you think is more likely? So let me ask you an important question. If the tax rates were to go down in the future, is it better to pay taxes now or later? If you said now, you're right. It's always better to address a problem now instead of putting it off. For instance, if you had a leaky pipe in your wall, would it be better to fix it right away or let it keep leaking until it rotted out the entire wall? Of course, it's better to fix it right away. The same is true when it comes to your taxes. Let's take a look. When you put money into your tax-qualified plan like a traditional IRA or a 401k, have you paid tax on the money before it goes in? So when you put money into an IRA or 401k, are you really saving? No. You are simply delaying tax, which compounds the tax problem, making it much more worse. This last tax trap, number 5, is a biggie. It's called the risk trap. Let me ask you another question. Does your current retirement strategy guarantee you will never lose money if the stock market goes down? If it does, then you're ahead of most people. However, if you're like most people, your retirement can and will be significantly affected by the stock market declines. Before we go further down this path, let's take a look at the stock market's average returns for the S&P 500 over the past 50 years. They say over the last 5 years it's averaged 5.08. Over the last 10 years it's averaged 3.55. And over the last 50 years it's averaged 11.28. See how different those numbers can range just over a matter of years, over a time frame? Here's a fun question for you. It's one of my favorites to ask. If you had an account that had experienced a negative 50% return in year 1 and then experienced a 50% positive return in year 2, what would be the average return? The average return would be 0. What is the actual real return? Negative 25%. Beginning of year 1, you had $1,000. And if you experienced a negative 50% return, at the end of year 1, you would have $500. And then after year 1 and year 2 had a 50% positive return, at the end of year 2, you would have $750. Now let's compare the two returns side by side and see how different they are. Do you see how the average return is always better than the real return? That will always be the case if you ever have to factor in any negative year's returns, which the market always has. But guess what number most mutual fund companies use to advertise to the public? So why is there a difference? Again, even if there is one negative year of return in that factor, the real return will always be less than the average return. That's why only these two averages will ever be equal if there are no negative years. Let's take a look at how this has played out in real life over the last 10 years. Here's the history of the S&P 500 index over the last 10 years. Even though 7 out of the last 10 years averaged a 15.28% return, when you factor in the 3 negative years of return, it only produced a measly return of just 3.63%. How's that for a bit of difference? Now let's play with these numbers a little bit and do two things. All 3 loss years and make them 0. No loss, no gain. Then let's also take the 4 out of the 7 years that had a better return than 13.5% and simply limit them to a maximum of 13.5% return. Let's look at an example of an account that has a 10% gain followed by a 10% loss for 10 straight years, up, down, up, down, up, down for 10 years. If an account has a 10 straight years of 10% losses and gain, what is the average return over that 10-year period? 0%, right? However, let's look at what the real return has been. If you start with 1,000 and the account has a 10% gain, what is the account value at the end of year 1? 1,100, right? 1,000 plus 10% equals 1,100. However, in the second year, when the account loses 10%, what does the account value go to? 1100 minus 10% equals $990. Even though the average return is 0, the account actually returns a negative 1%. If we carry that out for 10 years, here are the actual numbers. They would escalate down to $951. The account that experienced a 10% gain and then a 10% loss for 10 straight years would have a negative 4.9% return, even though the average return was 0. However, let's look at how this account would look if we applied two simple principles: no losses and capped gains. It's obvious which one of these accounts you'd rather have at the end of 10 years. Well, it's possible there is a product that works exactly this way. It guarantees no market losses ever, even though you are able to share in the market-like returns up to a certain amount. How are you able to get market-like returns with zero market risk? If you'd like to request your own free copy of Patrick Kelly's Retirement Miracle, you can go to our website, which is retirementplanningstore.com/safe-money.html. If you are an insurance agent, I can show you how you can get 20 free books to give away to your prospects and where to buy more. Contact me, email me, Dan@retirementplanningstore.com.